The Trump administration is desperate for war against, of course, everything that Donald Trump campaigned on. We are seeing this buildup toward war hit Venezuela. We saw the embarrassment Trump faced at South Korea in the APEC summit, where Xi Jinping came out with a major trade war win. Russia, when it comes to Ukraine, continues to pound Ukraine, continues to come out with new weaponry like the Burevestnik missile, which is just unstoppable, can go over 14,000 kilometers faster than any air defense system can intercept, and of course can hold nuclear weapons. So Russia and China are perhaps too difficult to topple at this time. So the United States under Trump is going after what it sees as low-hanging fruit in Venezuela. When it comes to Venezuela and Latin America, we know there's always a moment where some country, some government that the United States doesn't like comes under the wrecking ball of the United States. So war is potentially coming to Venezuela, and it's potentially coming very soon. The reports are that there are massive buildups of U.S. troops, aircraft carriers, replete with F-18 Hornets and F-35s. There is a readiness that is happening all across the region. In Trinidad and Tobago, for example, which Venezuela has lambasted as acting as a forward operating base for a potential regime change operation. The mainstream media has been saying the U.S. launching strikes on Venezuela is looking increasingly likely. The administration has identified military facilities in Venezuela, supposedly to smuggle narcotics, as potential targets for the attack. Although Trump has not made a final decision on whether to carry out the strikes inside of the country. Potential targets under consideration are military-controlled airports in ports, including airstrips and naval facilities. The outlet reported, citing one U.S. official. Donald Trump said it's not true. Marco Rubio has also said that they are not going to do this. But whenever the Trump administration says something like that, we have to wonder if it is true at all. Because how many times have we seen, for example, the Trump administration supposedly broker a ceasefire in Gaza, or be talking to Russia about the Ukraine conflict, and then do something like approve long-range strikes, or allow Israel to constantly break the ceasefire, or maybe even allow Israel to try to assassinate negotiators as they are discussing Trump's ceasefire plan? Nothing that the Trump administration says can be trusted. And I forgot Iran. How could I have forgotten Iran, where literally the U.S. under Trump spent months threatening first the Iranian government around this nuclear pretext, this farcical nuclear pretext that Iran was so close, weeks away from a nuclear weapon, to engage then in talks, and then to have the IAEA act as essentially a Mossad agent and operative to spy on Iran, and to use those talks to time an Israeli strike on Iran, which ended up being a surprise attack using mostly Mossad operatives and operations. And then, of course, the 12-day war happening, and the U.S. conducting its own Operation Midnight Hammer or whatever it has. So we know the story. The story is that the United States under Trump uses negotiations as a weapon. It uses its words, its so-called peace overtures, or its denial of wanting war, as a way to prepare people to fall asleep when the war actually happens. So this is what we have to actually keep in mind when Trump says, or any U.S. politician, U.S. representative says that there is not going to be a war. Because there are U.S. fighter jets stationed on Puerto Rico, Trinidad and Tobago. There are military installations going up, troops being deployed. They don't do that for fun. They do this to prepare for war. Now, it's getting dicey, though, because Venezuela is not as easy of an opponent as maybe the U.S. foreign policy establishment thinks it is, or maybe many people watching this video may think it is, because of the sanctions decimating the economy to a large degree, because of the fact that it's a smaller country. But the fact is that Venezuela is the number one oil-rich country in the world. It also has, despite being decimated by sanctions, been able to maintain its sovereignty. We have Nicolas Maduro, for example, engaging in a mass campaign to arm militias inside of Venezuela to defend the country from any U.S. incursion. If Remember, they said this about Gaddafi. If Nicolas Maduro was so unpopular, especially amongst the poorest of Venezuelans, why would he be telling the army to arm people who could then turn those guns around and overthrow him? The point here is that Venezuela is getting prepared, and it may not be as easy as anyone thought it would be, especially among the neocons and the Venezuela hawks, the Latin America hawks that sit within the Trump administration. Marco Rubio, I'm thinking of especially. Venezuela is not alone either. It's important to remember, while many have criticisms about how much Russia is doing, how much China is doing to assist the governments around the world and the peoples around the world that are under the heaviest of onslaughts from the US empire, it does stand to measure that it's not as if nothing is happening. Russia, for example, we had reports of this. Many thought this story here, heavy Russian cargo plane lands in Caracas amid US Venezuela tensions. Now, this story is very interesting because a lot of people saw it and were saying that it was Wagner. It was Wagner, right? The private military contractor that was so critical when it came to the Battle of Bakhmut, for example, in Ukraine, and then ended up being disbanded because of Yevgeny Prigozhin's issues and all of that drama that happened with Vladimir Putin. Nonetheless, we have Russia sending over, no matter what it is, all we know are the reports that a heavy transport aircraft of a type linked to its military's former Wagner mercenary group landed in Venezuela. The Ilyushin 70 IL-76 transport aircraft arrived in Caracas after a 2-day journey that took it from Russia via Armenia, Algeria, Morocco, Senegal, and Mauritania to Latin America. The multi-stop journey is emblematic of the circuitous routes used to avoid Western airspace or possible cargo inspections in unfriendly countries. And it's also possible that deliveries or pickups are made along the way because Russia has a military presence in Algeria and Mali. This is actually where a lot of the former Wagner are now, helping the governments and the new ECOWAS in the Western Sahel and whatnot fight terrorism that was created by U.S. regime change operations in Libya and Syria. Sorry about that. So it can transport up to 50 tons of cargo with 200 people, and they're known to have delivered small arms, military supplies, and even mercenaries. Large deliveries such as S-400 air defense systems would likely require several trips. There are rumors that that might be the case, air defense systems coming to Venezuela. Venezuela already, as Camille Escalante, journalist, said on my show, Venezuela does have Su-35s, does have Russian S-300s. Of course, no air defense system is foolproof. We have seen this over and over again, whether it's Iran or Ukraine, for example. It doesn't mean that it's going to defeat and win or win the air war, right? But the problem with Venezuela is that the opposition in Venezuela actually isn't that popular. This is important. And that Venezuela is an incredibly difficult place to fight a conventional war. This is a problem that the United States faces everywhere around the world. The United States actually really needs opposition types, proxies. It needs unconventional warfare, asymmetric warfare, because without it, its military cannot really dominate in the way that it once did. Not only because it's aging and it's for profit and all of the reasons I go over on my show, but also because the United States' way of fighting a war, right? Bombing into the Stone Age and then invading with a massive number of troops, that doesn't necessarily win anybody over. During Vietnam and even during Iraq, there was all this talk about, oh, can the U.S. win hearts and minds? Ridiculous. No one. You're not going to get a population to support you if you're bombing them and destroying their country militarily, violating their women, raping them, destroying families, bombing. They're talking about bombing airports. Let's be honest, that those will be civilian airports. This is what the United States does. It says, oh, that's a military target, when actually it is a civilian institution and civilian infrastructure. It usually takes a pretty big page out of Israel's playbook, and of course, it's hard to know who is the father, who is the son in that relationship a lot of the times. But Nonetheless, this is becoming a focal point where Venezuela has been said to have requested assistance from Russia and from China and from Iran. Now, many great journalists have gone to Venezuela and have documented the Iranian Venezuela relationship as being very close. Militarily, with the trade of drones, for example, Iran has pretty good drones, very advanced technology, as well as commerce, right? These two countries are sanctioned and they do economic activity between them to help alleviate that because each have resources that the other could use. You even have Iranian markets in the streets of Caracas, for example, that people can go to. And I know the Gray Zone in the past have done reports on this. So here's the report about that. Leaked U.S. documents. These are U.S. documents, so let's take it with a grain of salt. Reveal Venezuela is seeking radar systems, missile support, aircraft repairs from allies amid rising tensions. Nicolas Maduro is looking to Russia, China, and Iran to bolster its depleted defense capabilities. They say depleted, but they haven't really fought at all at the moment as it faces increased U.S. military presence in the Caribbean. This was leaked to the Washington Post. The radar systems, aircraft repairs, and missile supplies are being requested, supposedly. The appeals were conveyed in a letter addressed to Vladimir Putin of Russia to be delivered during a senior aides visit to Moscow earlier this month, or it was delivered during a senior aides visit to Moscow earlier in the month. He also prepared a letter, Maduro did, to Chinese President Xi Jinping seeking expanded military cooperation in response to the escalation between U.S. and Venezuela, according to documents published by the newspaper. Maduro urged Beijing to speed up Chinese firms' production of radar detection systems to strengthen Venezuela's defenses. This seems pretty far-fetched, by the way. It added these documents in the missive. Maduro emphasized the seriousness of perceived U.S. aggression in the Caribbean, framing U.S. military action against Venezuela as action against China due to their shared ideology. So that's what we're being told. That you know, and this could be fabricated in some respects because, well, it would be only to the benefit, right, of the elites in Washington to be able to link Venezuela to every single adversary. We've seen it, right? Venezuela is linked to Hezbollah because they support Palestinian resistance. That we've seen that that Hezbollah is smuggling fentanyl from China to Venezuela. All this very crass and crude and ineffective innuendo in a lot of ways. But nonetheless, this is what the United States does. Its propaganda machine is making this into a site of the Cold War. But it does matter that Russia and China, they do have deep relations, right? China has an all-weather partnership with Venezuela, which means that Venezuela considers as one of its priority allies as trading partners and as two countries looking to build and prosper together. So look, Russia and China have never said that they will not support militarily countries that they have partnerships with. We saw it with India and Pakistan in that conflict. Back in 2020, what was that, 2024? We saw what happened when Pakistan used the J-10Cs from China, that these older jets supposedly were massively effective, and they even destroyed a French military aircraft. So, this is not something that people should dismiss as completely out of hand. Venezuela is likely getting military assistance from somebody because Venezuela is not going to build everything indigenously, especially given the fact that it is under a certain kind of sanctions that puts it under some disadvantage. But nonetheless, this is becoming a real threat. Okay, this has become a real threat toward Venezuela, the regime change operations. People need to know the reason why this is happening is many-fold. Not only has Venezuela, since 1998, when Hugo Chavez was elected president of Venezuela, been undertaking its own kind of political and economic project that the United States doesn't like. Venezuela nationalizes its oil. It redistributes that wealth, or at least it attempts to redistribute that wealth to fund social housing and various other projects. Venezuela has built millions of homes for the poorest Venezuelans in the country. in order to alleviate poverty. Even today, the sanctions, Venezuela still invests a dramatic amount of money, what it can, in order to ensure that the sanctions do not destroy the lives of ordinary people there. And they've done a pretty good job. If we look at the economic numbers, don't look at the currency numbers, because sanctions, of course, are going to distort that. But in terms of how Venezuela has been able to ensure that it protects the livelihoods of people, it has done a decent job despite the forced migration and all that have plagued it. So that's one reason, the fact that Venezuela's political and economic system is anathema to what the United States wants, which is a servant. It wants the Venezuelan government to bow to it. It wants a CIA operative back in there. During the Bush administration, the first one, they kidnapped Hugo Chavez. The CIA, they kidnapped him. But what happened? What happened then? The people came out into the streets and they demanded he be returned, and he was returned. So that environment, that political environment, hasn't necessarily gone away. Another big reason, so there's the oil, there's, of course, right, whenever there's a large amount of oil, even if the United States doesn't want to necessarily consume that all for itself, if it has control of the oil market and can manipulate it, then this is what the dollar system in many ways is about. Then it gives the United States empire a greater capacity to influence both the global marketplace as well as its geopolitical endeavors. So if Venezuela can come under its dominion, then it will be able to control, similar to how Saudi Arabia pushes, pumps that oil to undermine, to lower prices. It stops the spigot when prices need to be higher. That dynamic, they want to see that. They want to see those resources out of the hands of the Venezuelan people and government into the hands of those who will take U.S. orders. Another reason, and I think this is maybe the most important political reason, with those two dynamics in mind, the third one is the multipolar world. Venezuela is one of the last governments. When we have Brazil under Lula, which has a lot of internal problems, way far more internal problems than even Venezuela does. So Venezuela, Brazil, there aren't many countries left, right? We saw Argentina fall to the libertarian Javier Milei, who is just taking U.S. bailouts and stripping the entire country of anything it has left and selling it off to the highest bidder. So the situation in Latin America is very dire. But when it comes to Venezuela, Cuba, and the Caribbean, when it comes to Brazil and these countries, the United States wants to stifle and it wants to break multipolarity. So Venezuela is a really important point of focus to do that. It is public enemy number one, or 1A. Usually it's Cuba that's number one, but nonetheless, Venezuela, given its oil-rich resources, thus there usually takes even more precedent than Cuba. So these are the reasons. And the question now is, will it succeed? Will they be able to win in Venezuela in a war if it should happen? Because it's not even a guarantee that it will. Well, let's take a look at this piece. I wanted to show this because with all of this in mind, I think it's important to look at, well, will this happen? This is the Christian Science Monitor, a very establishment source. Okay, this is not your pro Venezuela, pro multipolar world resource, the Christian Science Monitor. And I want to just go to a particular quote, okay, in this regime change challenges. So here it is. All of the context here. U.S. forces training off the coast of Trinidad and Tobago. Guided missile destroyer, the USS Gravely, has ported there. You have special operations forces being spotted in the area as well. And the Gerald Ford's arrival adds 5,000 sailors, and that's in addition to 10,000 troops, as well as in Puerto Rico. But it's no easy feat, right? No matter how much the U.S. militarizes the region, it's going to have to put in a force of 50,000, and some estimates from military experts say 200,000 U.S. troops to engage in a ground war, which I don't actually think is going to happen, because I don't think the Trump administration can afford a ground war and not completely lose the midterm elections. And then, of course, perhaps completely delegitimize the so-called MAGA development movement, whatever people want to call it. It'll be over. It'll be finished, done. There will be a mass migration out of it. It will be chaos, and essentially they would hand over whatever this is worth, because the Democrats are warmongers and they're agents of empire. But they would basically hand over cede political power to the Democrats, without the Democrats having to do anything at all. So it would not be quick and easy, says the president of the Inter-American Dialogue. It would be prolonged. There's no appetite for death among American troops in the U.S. for American troops dying on Venezuelan soil. And this is a big part, right? Venezuela's size, terrain, urban centers, tropical forests. Ground warfare is very challenging. Troops would have to battle multiple armed groups whose fate is closely tied to that of Maduro, they say, including illegal mining groups. There's a lot of propaganda here. The point here is, what they're really saying is, first of all, these armed groups, these militias are people, and these people are going to fight back. So that's going to have to be dealt with. So a lot of people are going to die, including U.S. troops. And, this isn't even to say how, I always say this to everybody. What happens if the United States has something sunk or downed? What happens if a U.S. aircraft is downed? What happens if a U.S. destroyer is downed? This is a big problem. The United States cannot handle this politically. It is a very fragile empire at this time. It is very sensitive. Its exceptionalism is constantly being questioned around the globe. The genocide has obliterated it in Gaza. The Ukraine conflict has shown its military weakness, its inability to do anything with Russia. China is just growing exponentially. Its achievements just keep mounting and mounting and mounting, and it's just flying by the United States. The U.S. empire is very, very, very sensitive. So the reason why the 12-day war with Iran had to end is because the U.S. was very worried that Israel was going to be flattened to the point where, yeah, maybe it would still exist, maybe for quite a while, but it would be a very embarrassing thing for the United States not to be able to protect Israel. So it's a very fragile empire at this time, and it's very unclear whether the United States can even handle politically a U.S. fighter jet, an F-35, whatever, F-16, a USS destroyer, something like that, being downed or sunk. If that happens, what then? Total escalation, a complete disastrous miscalculation, whatever it is. It's not going to be good, right? It's going to lead to markets crashing, the economy crashing. It's going to lead to an untenable political situation. That's why airstrikes are more likely. This is how the United States generally likes to do things. Send out those F-18 Hornets, launch those cruise missiles. Offensive strikes would be aimed at command and control centers, right? No. There would be strikes to submit the population. They would want the population to be subdued. But it wouldn't be easy, because what happens when you bomb a people in a country, those people aren't going to like you. They're going to dislike you more. And that could, if the United States decides, this is my assessment, the United States decides that it wants to militarily get into a quagmire in Venezuela, what's going to happen is the entire region in Latin America is going to become more united than ever against U.S. empire. Right now, the political situation in Latin America is not an easy one. You have countries like Venezuela, like Brazil, in South America, for example. They are attempting to chart a course for multipolarity and some independence from U.S. Foreign policy. But a lot of countries are stuck with regimes and governments that are very subservient, for example, in Ecuador. And even Bolivia now, which was once a staunch site of independence in Latin America under Evo Morales, and then, of course, under Luis Arce. Now it's no more. So they just lost that election. The election has gone to the so-called centrists, which usually just means somebody, some people, some political party entity that will sell off resources to the United States and the West. So it's not an easy situation, but for independence, for people who value sovereignty. But if the United States bombs and creates a situation that makes the United States look like the warmonger that it is, well, a lot of people are going to unite around a different political project. That's just generally what happens. It's why these wars keep backfiring and failing. So, now I want to shift to, so we have many elements here. We have, how is the multipolar world dealing with this? Russia and China supporting Venezuela continuously, economically, militarily. Iran too. We have the situation of, well, is the U.S. military capable of doing this? But then we also have, I think, the propaganda war that we have to really look at. Okay, so you all might remember that Maria Corina Machado, the erstwhile Venezuelan opposition figure, won the Nobel Peace Prize this year, and recently, actually, what was that? Last month. So she's an opposition figure, and she is not for peace. She's a hawk. And what's so telling about what I believe is actually an operation, giving her the Nobel Peace Prize, anointing her the leader of the opposition, which she actually isn't, and I'll show you friend Ben Norton, who has proven this. Maria Corina Machado, she is not only not for peace, she actively demands war. She is going on Western mainstream media. She spoke to Bloomberg recently, and she literally said she supports the United States bombing her country. Here we go.
Do you support US military strikes on the territory of Venezuela as part of what you call a process?
I believe that the increase in pressure and the escalation that's taking place is the only way to force Maduro to understand that it's time to go.
Do you support?
There you go. There you go. That's what she supports. She says the escalation is the only way to get Maduro to understand. What does that mean? It's the only way to topple him, right? But that shows something. People should understand that if the opposition figure who's supposed to be so pro-democratic is clamoring for U.S. military strikes, what does it say about her political project? Mind you, she is of the type connected to Juan Guaido, who where is he? Right? He was anointed by the Trump administration during his first administration, and what happened to him? Gone. Right? He's gone. He's gone because nobody likes him. I don't know where he's in Miami. He's somewhere. He's living out his life, paid for by the CIA somewhere up until his death. But he was never a legitimate figure. He was an implant. Miss Machado here is showing her real strengths and also showing the weakness of the opposition political project, because they shouldn't have to rely on U.S. military strikes. Why not just do it through elections? Oh, well, it's so suppressed. It's so repressed. I'm sorry. It wasn't just 12, 13 years ago. The same political system that Jimmy Carter said is one of the most democratic in the world. That's what he said. He's an American. He was a former U.S. president. Venezuela has elections. Venezuela has a voting system. In my opinion, I think it's far more democratic than the United States. But even if it wasn't, it still exists. And if the opposition is supported by the United States, then why not manipulate it to win electorally? Well, because no matter how much you manipulate an electoral system, you still need people to vote for you. And people like Machado do not have that level of support. And I'll just put up what Ben Norton wrote about this. He said, Maria Machado vows to privatize oil. U.S. corporations will make a lot of money. She's the Nobel Peace Prize winner. I want to show you what he said about the elections, because this is important, right? Who she really is, working with the Trump administration to, here we go. working within the Trump administration to overthrow the government. The problem is that she's not even the most popular opposition political figure. She only won in 2012, 33, I almost said 36%, 3.66% of the vote in the opposition. So this isn't even against Maduro. This is of the opposition parties. And here were the results there. It was Enrique Capriles, who for a while was the moderate, quote unquote, pro-US, pro-democrat, so-called pro-democracy force. Capriles actually condemns people like Machado because they are violent. They're the ones who lead the guarimbas in Venezuela. They have happened in Nicaragua. I completely forgot about Nicaragua. But Nicaragua, they lead these violent uprisings of rich people and people who are paid by rich people to do terrible things like hurt ordinary people and workers on the street in order to create chaos and make it so it looks like the government needs to be toppled because there is an unmanageable situation. Basically, crisis actors that have real consequences for people. That is who she is. So the large part of the people who want a military solution and there to be an invasion do not live in Venezuela, says Capriles. They do not even consider what will be the consequences of that. Human lives are lost. So that's the real opposition, right? The organizations she supported for have been funded by the National Endowment for Democracy since 2003. And look, this is her with George W. Bush. She supported all of George W. Bush's wars, Iraq, Afghanistan, etc., etc. This is who she is. Right? This is who she is. This is what Maria Corina Machado. This is who we should be aware of her being. And the reason why I wanted to bring that up is because the model that the United States has right now for Venezuela is not a good one. It is not stable. There's nothing planned about it. The United States is using the pretext of narcotics and all of this, which is ridiculous because Venezuela is not the primary force of drug trafficking in Latin America. That's the DEA, let's be honest. That is the United States itself. This has been a generations-long thing. Look up Gary Webb. Look up the Iran-Contra scandal, which did run through countries like Nicaragua during the anti-Sandinista Contra movement, the proxies, the violent forces that the U.S. supported. There's a lot of drug smuggling, weapon smuggling, all of that. But no matter with cocaine, he proved that. Look it up. But overall, when it comes to drug trafficking in places like Colombia, for example, and other parts of Latin America, the U.S. has a big hand in that. So it's absolutely ridiculous. The Trump administration is just bombing boats, killing dozens upon dozens and dozens of people. We don't know who they are, just bombing the boats. And this is not a strategy at all. The U.S. doesn't have a strategy here. The U.S. is just going to try to, as Trump puts it, kill them all. And hopefully by killing them all, the government of Venezuela will submit. That is the policy. That is the orientation.